Okay, so today we are speaking to Charles Basman. He's a graduate of the School of Visual Arts. He also went to the High School of Art and Design in New York City. Charles's advice for aspiring artists is absolutely great. He is currently a private school teacher, and his advice on working through it, keeping on going, don't let things stop you from being a creative is absolutely incredible. You're going to love it. Here's Charles. Welcome to Creative Ethos. Tonight we got Charles Basman with us today. And Charles, you graduated from the School of Visual Arts, and now you're actually an instructor, an art teacher. Give us a little
Yes.
bit about your journey.
Well, I started painting and drawing at a young age, about 5. I took private instruction here in New York when I was about the same age. I actually had a really good painting teacher at that time who actually introduced me to oil painting, which at that time was very unusual. I then went to art and design, which is a specialized art high school in New York. And after that, I went to the School of Visual Arts, where I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. It's there where I rediscovered oil painting.
Nice. So, how old were you when you first started using oil paint?
Oh well, if I count the time when I was a child and I had private instruction, it would be probably around 6 or 7 years old, I believe. Yeah, and then rediscovering it when I was in college, probably in my first year in college, actually.
So, what were some of your influences, and why did you start art that young?
I was very much into comic books, as most children are at that age, and I actually wanted to get into architecture at that time. So my parents thought that I was going to be an architect because I would constantly make floor plans and design buildings, etc. So I was always in the creative state of mind. I then discovered animation, and I started to like animation. So it's pretty much all over the place, not with a general focus on where I wanted to go. That just came later.
Just creativity in general. You didn't know what you were particularly going to head to. It was just art, right?
It was just art, and when you're so young, you don't really think of career and where is this going to take me. You're on the journey basically. I think the career part starts when you're in high school, and then you start thinking, well, where am I going to go to college? What am I going to study? But earlier on, you're just kind of there for the ride, basically, to see where you go.
And so, High School of Art and Design, then SVA. What during that time period was your art process? Like, what was the kind of thing that inspired you the most? What caught you?
Well, I would say in art and design, I had fellow students that were so good, and I was still am very competitive. So I would look at them and I would be inspired by them, but at the same time, try to compete with them. So interesting how competition kind of makes you work harder. So I started pen and ink, which I really loved. Again, I had no real direction. Um, and discovered comic book artists I really liked, like John Byrne, who I really liked at that time. So again, I haven't really found my direction yet. It was pretty much all over the place. Just being in that environment was inspiring. Actually, it's a great high school.
Were there any competitions or anything like that that you took part in or discovered while you were at art and design?
Not not as far as I could remember. I was competitive. I didn't enter competitions that aren't designed.
So it was just mainly like just personal competition, right? Like you would see what other people were doing, and then it would kind of make you work that much harder.
Exactly. Yeah, and it wasn't. The word competition has some negative connotations, I suppose, right, from people, but also a very healthy thing to do. So you could compete and still be in a healthy state of mind. It just pushes you. That's all. It's not like I was trying to out to get anyone or anything like that. It was just being in the energy of being in an art school, being around very creative people was fuels you to work harder, or at least me, to work harder.
At that time, I'm assuming that art and design and SVA were very academic in how they functioned, how they taught, all that kind of stuff. What then inspired you to go onto the mythology track? Because a lot of your art is like mythology inspired, right?
Yeah, right now it is. It wasn't that way when I was in college. And I remember rediscovering, I believe it was my second year in college, where I was still kind of not sure what direction. And then I rediscovered NCYF, who was still my hero. And that changed everything. Um, And I have a very supportive family. I always have in the arts. So taking me to the Brandywine Museum to see original YFs, to meet models that posed for him in the Brandywine was pretty much like a change of direction in my art that I'll never forget. That was just eye opening.
And was that around the time that you started experimenting with tempera, all that kind of stuff?
No, I was more experimenting with oil, and I know I wasn't using it correctly. It's funny how
What,
in oil
you weren't
paint,
using oil paint correctly?
yeah, well, I didn't know anything about medium or how to stretch canvas or anything like that. Those are things I learned later on in life. I was just using oil for the sake of using oil, just to get an effect. It's later on that I started learning the science of mixing, of proper palette care, of certain brushes. These are things that are technical and you learn over time.
Would you say that that was one of the major challenges early on for you, just discovering how to implement the various media that you were discovering?
Yes, because and of course SPA School of Visual Arts had extremely talented people uh, going there. So yeah, so of course my competition streak kicked in at School of Visual Arts, and very good teachers that would be very tough, but in a great way. They would push you. So fortunately, I had very good painting teachers and who taught me the science behind art, and it is a science, and showed me how to mix, keep a proper palette, how to literally paint, figure, how to start, finish, etc. It's nothing like having good teachers. So um, that actually helped develop my style. Although, I mean, of course, it takes a lifetime to really learn
Absolutely.
how
Yeah.
to paint.
So is that what inspired you to become an instructor?
Yeah, I've always liked teaching, and I started teaching when I was actually in my first job. I was teaching part time, kind of by accident. A school contacted me asking me to teach little kids, and I remember telling them I don't teach little kids, and they kept trying to get me to work there and asked me just to come in, and I reluctantly took the job, and then I started to like it, um, and then here I am, like teaching full time. So funny how that happens.
No, absolutely. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, it's good that you knew what you wanted to do, right? Like you've always had that. And for everybody who doesn't know out there, like we've known each other since art and design, right? Everything that you've worked on, of all your projects, what's one of the projects that holds a special place in your heart?
Oh, that's so hard to say. There's a landscape in here that I painted outside. Not necessarily my favorite painting I've ever done, but it's the story behind it. Sometimes that is special. So I remember painting that. And it's the largest painting I've ever done. And it's just here to kind of not taunt me, but to tell me about bravery, basically. So um,
So was that plein air?
it's plein air, and I remember it was the hardest plein air painting I've done. It was for a show, so it had to be a certain size. Physically and mentally, it was just draining to work on it. But with plein air painting, it's a physical process. So you could look at a plein air painting you've done years ago and remember like what the weather was like and what etc. Who spoke to you. So when I look at it, all those memories like kind of come back again. Not hmm?
Oh, no,
Sorry.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's not technically like my favorite painting, but it's just what's behind it.
The experience, all that stuff. Now, you just mentioned something that's interesting. In terms of working plein air, how do you deal with people in the environment? Because that's part of it as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here in New York, of course, you get very nice people coming up to you. Mostly you get people that don't know how to approach an artist, so that they don't really know what to say. They're a little nervous. So patience is a virtue when you paint outside. Of course, you get very crazy people coming up to you, so there's a little like a risk of painting outside. But mostly people are very nice. Children are very inquisitive. It's you never know what you're sparking in someone. They're looking at the creative process, and they've probably never seen that before. Um, so it's challenging sometimes, but mostly rewarding to be outside. And you're dealing with nature, which is uncompromising. So
And I can imagine that the rewarding side of it would be someone who actually sees you working outside might get inspired to start something themselves. Because I mean, there's you just don't know, right? It's like there's people out there who never even considered art because they've never seen it. You know, they've never seen the process. They've never seen anyone actually doing something and accomplishing something out in the world.
I mean, I always think like, especially for like a teenager or someone very young, seeing me paint outside, I'm like, well, if I were their age, that would kind of change my life, sort of, right? Like it would, even if they don't get into the arts, it's something you remember.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you have a conversation that, sparks something else, right? It's like just the idea of going up to someone, having that conversation, because it does take a little bit of bravery to do that.
It does, and I there are artists I know that won't do it. They just they won't go out there and paint, probably because it's so exposed. Uh, they're so out there. They're used to being in their studio. I understand that. Lately, I've been more of a studio artist than a plein air artist, so I understand like that it could be difficult.
Is that because the environment is changing in New York, or is it because of other reasons?
For me personally, it's a little bit of everything. It is very comfortable to work in an art studio. You have your equipment around you. Again, you don't have to deal with people, um, and you don't have to carry your equipment on site. That could be a burden and be a bit of a problem. But then that's the fun of it as well.
Yeah,
So
there's a charm to that, right? There's a
yeah, and I do miss that, and I intend to do that a lot this summer. It's the again, you're dealing with the weather as well. Um, so I'd love to take my students plein air painting. I've taught workshops outside, but never took my high school students plein air painting. That's a little bit of a liability, but
right, right.
you know,
Well, and do you work exclusively with oil paint when you're out, or do you switch up media?
sometimes watercolor.
Okay,
Sometimes I do drawing, but mostly plein air painting, which is oil.
okay, very good.
Such a quick medium to use.
But I would just imagine that it's more of a hassle because of the your paint thinner and all that kind of stuff.
True, but with experience and with years of doing it, you learn how to accommodate your equipment and to compact it, how to store everything, what kind of paint you need, what you don't need. You tend to learn how to use less, how to work less,
Right, that
basically.
makes sense.
You really don't have to take a lot of materials with you. You take what's necessary, and with experience, you start to learn what's necessary. You don't have to take half your studio outside in plein air, right? Probably not even that much. You don't need much to say much, at least in art. So
So when you're doing plein air, is it more kind of like a Zorn palette, or is it
I've actually never used the Zorn palette outside, although I have done a YouTube video where I use the Zorn palette for portrait painting, and people have asked me to do another video where I use it outside. Uh, it's very difficult to use outside. I do have a limited palette outside, but not the Zorn palette, which eliminates blue. Not using blue outside is quite a challenge because it's pretty much everywhere. So never done that, but I do have a palette that I use primarily outside. So I
which
have
is
some.
which is a limited palette? That's why I brought up the whole
It's
idea of
pretty.
the
It's
Zorn.
limited, but there is blue and there is green on the palette, and sometimes black. Never really been a fan of black color paint, but it has its uses outside. No, I'm okay with it now, actually, more than I used to be.
So now, is there any advice that you would give to aspiring artists?
What I tell my students all the time, I've encountered this last week. If you encounter a problem, just keep going. It's art could be it'll raise obstacles at you constantly. It is an open freedom of expression, and when you're freely expressive, you're going to encounter people that are going to try to stop you. And if you're committed and you work hard, you can do anything. So I would say work hard, develop your skill, and treat it like a science because it is a science. Um, and just don't be afraid to express yourself. What I tell students all the time,
Don't be afraid to express themselves
creatively.
creatively. Okay.
Like fear is the one thing that stops people from actually being fully creative. And that goes with everything: visual arts, music, etc. Fear is something you learn. You're not born with it. You learn fear. So I have to tell you that the adults that I've taught have more fear than the 5-year-olds that I've taught. So it is something you learn over time, and that's something you can't conquer it completely, but you can master it.
And it's interesting that you mentioned just keep going, because that's something that someone else mentioned on this podcast. And to me, that's always been the thing, right? Like people tend to get stuck and then they stop, and they tend to wait for inspiration, which stops them also, because it's like you're going to keep waiting and waiting and waiting. Just work through it, just pick up your brush or your pen and get to work.
Oh, sure. And as a teacher, I encounter it all the time. Again, I teach teenagers, so you can imagine like they get stopped in every direction. Um, so yeah, you have to you again, fear is something you have to overcome. It's um, but again, you can't master it. I mean, of course, look, I'm human and I get afraid to do certain things, but if I listened to that, I wouldn't create anything. That's my advice.
No, it's perfect. That's perfect, because I feel the same way, especially when starting something new. I mean, you look at a blank canvas or a blank sheet of paper and it stops you immediately, because it's like, oh my God, I've got to fill this entire thing. I've got to do something. One of the things that I've learned to do over the over the years to kind of kill that is, if there's a white sheet of paper or a white canvas or whatever that I'm going to be working on, I immediately take it and make a mark.
Yeah,
Just I
good
immediately
start.
take, yeah, I take a pencil or I take something else and I just make a mark, just to kill that white. Because the thing is, yeah, it will stop you. It's the silliest thing in the world, right? But it's a genuine thing, and I think a lot of us feel that. And it's just a matter of, don't be intimidated by, number one, the materials, number two, the idea that it has to, whatever it is that you put down on canvas or paper, it has to be perfect, because it doesn't. You just have to finish.
Exactly. Yeah, or start at least. Just start. Um, yeah, when you get older, fear of judgment, fear of competition, fear of somebody being better than you, all that just kicks in. Uh, which is why teaching little children, they haven't learned that yet. So if you tell a little child to paint the sky, there's no, oh my God, this is going to be judged. How am I going to sell this? Is it going to be in a gallery? None of that kicks in. That's later on, right? It's incredible to me to see like little kids like just paint, right? But teenagers that I teach, if I tell them to paint the sky, they just sit there and they look at it like the paper or whatever. Interesting. I just find that very
And I think
interesting.
well, I mean, obviously they've been in the world a little longer and they've been judged for a longer time, and they all those things start coming back to you, right?
Or somebody said something to you derogatory, and you may not remember it completely, literally, but it's in the back of your mind. Somebody said something, and then that stops you from being creative too. And I know it's difficult,
And it might not even have anything to do with art, creativity, or whatever. I mean, anything in your life that you were slapped down about
of
can come
course,
back.
of course. And the greater you choose to be in your life, the more people will try to stop you because it's their own fear trying to stop you, their own judgment. Um, so just keep that in mind. That the higher you try to aspire, the more people will try to stop you. It's just what happens, which is why you have to have a tough skin. And art is one of the hardest things to keep going because it's so open. Basically, you're opening your heart to people. Not easy.
Yeah, you're putting it all out there for people to see, right?
Exactly. Truly.
Yeah. So I think that's a great place to end it. Charles, thank you so much.
No problem.
You, thanks for doing this. This is Creative Ethos. We are done. Thank you for subscribing to everyone out there, and yeah, we'll see you again. Thanks.